Welcome to GP AM 660, your home for the world's biggest auto races brought right into your living room. I'm Adam Calhoun, and I welcome you to our coverage of the historic Sim Studios 1924 Grand Prix season. With new cars, new drivers, and new regulations to cover, let me get you up to speed on what happened during the off-season. First out of the gate, the Grand Prix Commission ordered a new spec fuel for the season to allow for a race in Egypt. This lowered the horsepower of all the cars to some degree, but none more so than the Bugatti cars of defending champion Richard Waxon, Jean-Paul Lacroix, and new to the team, ex-Roland Pillane driver Clara Funk. The Bugatti team boss believes all three of their cars have lost 9 to 12 horsepower due to this change. This is inconvenient, especially as Bugatti is debuting a new car this year, the T35. The Italians have arrived to the Grand Prix as they usually do, swiftly and in style. They've brought two new cars, an Alfa Romeo P2 driven by Hans Rosemeyer and a Fiat 805 driven by rookie Tirano Salvaro. Duke Morton makes his return to Sunbeam, as does Francois Roux to Delage. Sunbeam brings a modified version of the 1923 car, while Delage is debuting a new model, the 2LCV. However, trouble was afoot for the newly reformed Roland Pillane and Schmid team, as their lead driver Francis Xavier Donaldson was kidnapped en route to the first race on the Targo Florio. Later in the season, he would be replaced by Ninian Roai Kauposh, an experienced racing freelancer with several outlaw races under his belt. Round 1 was held on the Targo Florio, the famous 45-mile racecourse around the roads of the island of Sicily. Whether dashing along countrysides or blasting through towns, the drivers found the course challenging and unforgiving. While leaving the town of Colassano, Richard Waxon would collide with a tall curve, breaking his steering. After making a swift repair, he would continue on until his steering failed completely. The car would leave the road and get stuck in a field. Waxon, although uninjured from the crash, was taken to hospital by a spectator after fainting at the sight of an approaching cow.
Johnson, it's looking at me. Get the gun.
The race would continue, with Duke Morton, Tirano Salvaro, and Jean-Paul Lacroix pulling out a lead over the rest of the competitors. All three would finish the race in that order. However, talk of the town after the race was over Hans Rosemeyer, who attempted to rescue the Bugatti driver Clara Funk after a smash-up left her car stranded in a valley. The kind gesture was eventually made null and void, though, with both cars becoming stuck and having to retire from the race. Round 2 would bring us back to Indiana and the world-famous Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Last year, the race came down to an exciting duel between Waxon and Lacroix, who hit the wall in the final turn. This year, with the Bugatti cars struggling for straight-line speed, it would be the Italian cars of Rosemeyer and Salvaro that would dominate the race. They would pull away in the early stages with Duke Morton in hot pursuit. However, the Italian cars were simply too fast and ran away with the race. That doesn't mean things were boring, however. Francois Roux, after missing the starting grid with a mistimed bathroom break, would storm up through the field with the fastest laps of the race. However, his car would run out of fuel from his galactic pace with only 2 laps to go, coasting into the pit lane. Round 3 brings us to the roads of Fontenay, a high-speed course strung around the forests of France. Now stick with me for just a second, my dear listener, as I need to break the fourth wall for a minute and explain something. We were attempting to use a skin for the Fontenay track that would have turned Fontenay into a dirt road, which would have been more in tune with these 1924 Grand Prix cars. For some reason, this did not work as intended on my computer, and as a result, my game still shows an asphalt road but has all the dirt physics. And in the race itself, I was still getting all the dirt effects and couldn't see a thing behind other cars. As with a lot of the races this season, the Italian car of Tirano Salvaro would lead Duke Morton in the early stages of the race. Clara Funk and Ninian Kauposch, finally making his debut, would be following close behind. However, for the other Bugatti cars of Waxon and Lacroix, plus Francois Roux in the hugely powerful but unstable Delage, things weren't going so good. Waxon struggled to come to grips with the dirt surface and made many unplanned stops to look at some scenery much closer than he would have liked. Meanwhile, Lacroix and Francois Roux continued to feud with their cars, in a constant battle of going forward rather than sideways. At the very least, they were having much more luck not hitting things other than each other, unlike poor Waxon. Eventually, Francois Roux would come to grips with his machine and slowly made inroads to catching the leading pack of cars: Salvaro, Morton, Funk, and Kauposch. However, most unlucky was Hans Rosemeyer. After his car developed engine problems, the driver would miss the starting grid by several minutes. He would make a heroic drive through the forests alone, eventually catching Richard Waxon, who at this point had lost every gear but reverse and was trying to get to the finish line by driving backwards. Round 4 finally brought the Grand Prix to Egypt, and once again Tirano Salvaro would set sail for another victory. However, the rest of the drivers were struggling to come to grips with the massive, oddly shaped curbs that had a habit of launching cars into the air. Richard Waxon would be the first victim, nearly rolling his car over on the opening lap. However, the race would continue without incident for several laps until tragedy reared its ugly head. Hans Rosemeyer, while running second, would also fall victim to the Egyptian road construction. After his car rolled onto its side, it would be hit by Richard Waxon, who turned the car turtle. By some miracle, Rosemeyer would survive this crash with a skull fracture and broken neck. He would be taken to hospital as the race continued on. On the positive side of things, though, the biggest mover of the day would be Duke Morton, who overcame an unscheduled pit stop for a transmission issue to eventually finish second. Clara Funk would round out the top 3 for Bugatti. For the final round of the 1924 Grand Prix season, Japanese driver Daichi Honda would replace Hans Rosemeyer at Monza, Italy's Temple of Speed. Honda would prove to be an extremely fast driver as he took the lead early while being tailed by the usual suspects. However, the track was slightly damp due to the fog, and several drivers were caught out on the first lap, making trips into the sand traps. As the race continued on, it seemed no one could stop Honda, who had pulled out a 5-second lead over the rest of the cars, all battling for position. However, a rookie mistake would see Honda glance down at his fuel gauge after the engine stuttered, and he would lose control of his car. Out of fuel and on the final lap, Honda was left stranded as Duke Morton would finally steal away a win. But the 1924 championship would go to Tirano Salvaro by a single point. An outstanding drive for the young Italian driver and his Fiat, and heartbreak for Duke Morton in second. Clara Funk would sneak into third position, clutching an otherwise horrible year for Bugatti. Overall, it is safe to say the 1924 season was one of learning. There was a few technical issues and unfortunate crashes, but even so, there was close racing, camaraderie, and a good time had by all. Congratulations to Tirano Salvaro for winning the historic Sim Studios 1924 GP season, and thank you to all the competitors that took part. This has been Adam Calhoun for GPAM 660, and I'll see you next time.